Hi and welcome to this webinar. My name's Tasha Jennings. I'm a fertility naturopath and nutritionist, and I love helping proactive women and couples improve their fertility well-being to create healthy pregnancies and healthy babies. And I'm talking today about a topic I am particularly passionate about, because this is really where my journey into fertility and pregnancy began, and even before that. So my background is in product development. I developed a pharmaceutical or vitamin range for a large pharmacy company about 15 years ago now. And I really developed a passion for understanding the key nutrients, the forms of the nutrients too. So it's not just about the vitamin being in the tablet. Is it actually in the right form and the right dose to get into the bloodstream, to get into our cells, to be effective? And that's what I'm particularly passionate about, is actually getting the right forms and the right doses for that person to be able to properly metabolize and absorb. So this is how my company came about, which is Zycia, and means life, and provides the premium prenatal supplement, Zycia Natal Nutrients. Because it's when we were trying to conceive that I switched from developing products, and it was quite a large product range for a pharmacy company, but I switched to looking at fertility and pregnancy when we were having difficulty. And I really threw myself into doing everything I could to help me conceive. And that started with, obviously, as most of us do in this field, searching PubMed. And then I went beyond that and contacted the researchers who were doing the research, asking them why they were using certain doses, why they were using certain forms of certain nutrients. I really wanted to understand what the outcomes were and why they were getting those outcomes, so I can really help other people, not just myself. Unfortunately, we were able to conceive our two beautiful children who are now 5 and 8. And now I'm really passionate about helping other people who perhaps may be in that same situation. And I now see my patients, which is a wonderful journey, right through from preconception all the way through to having their babies, which is just such a privilege. So I do, obviously, a naturopath, nutritionist, Bachelor of Health Science in Natural Medicine, diplomas in naturopathy, herbal medicine and nutrition. And I have been helping women and couples with their health and fertility for over 18 years, close to 20 now. I'm an avid reader. Obviously, PubMed is huge for me, but I also love a good novel. I'm a nature lover, and we did face our own fertility struggles, which is where this journey began for me into pregnancy. And this was our first baby. This is now my office companion. She's now at 10 years old, one hip operation later, so she's a bit slower on her feet, but I'm really passionate about helping other people whose first baby may have looked similar to mine. So in this shortened version of the webinar, I'm really just going to touch on the key nutrients, and in the longer version, I'm going to really dive more deeper into the metabolic pathways, into the recommended doses that I look for, and blood levels that I look for in my patients, preconception all the way through pregnancy. But I just want to touch on these, highlight these key nutrients. And these are the 6 that I think are most important for preconception and all the way through pregnancy. So folate, I think most people, if you're in this industry, you've heard about folate, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions about folate. So I want to just clear up a couple of things here and obviously dig a lot deeper into particularly folate and its metabolism and MTHFR and homocysteine. There's a few extra things we need to look at, not just folate. So why do we know so much about it? I mean, it is essential for DNA creation. You cannot sustain a pregnancy without folate, yet we're totally reliant on dietary sources for adequate supply. So we don't manufacture folate. We need to get it through our diet. That's why it's so essential for that DNA creation. And we can't sustain a pregnancy without folate because it is so critical to that development of that DNA. So it supports the development of the neural tube, which I think it's most known for, which, as you would know, connects the brain and the spinal cord and develops very early on in pregnancy. So the first 4 to 5 weeks, that neural tube is developed. So we really want it in the preconception period, where it also supports embryo development as well and egg development even prior to that, because our eggs are developing 90 days before we conceive. So I like to work with my patients right from those 90 days all the way through their pregnancy, ideally. So, as I said, healthy folate levels improve embryo quality and increase chances of conceiving. So, again, very critical preconception. Low folate levels are linked to subfertility or difficulty conceiving, and also adverse pregnancy outcomes later in pregnancy. So, recurrent miscarriage if we can't properly create that DNA, preeclampsia, and abrupta placenta. So, we really want plentiful folate going into a pregnancy, ideally. However, 40% of women of reproductive age are not achieving sufficient systemic levels of folate to prevent neural tube defects. And unfortunately, this is despite the fortification of food and the widespread use of folic acid supplements. I think everyone is aware how important folate is, but folic acid is not the same thing as folate. So folate, as you can see, I've been talking about folate and its benefits in the body, and that's because folate is the natural nutrient that is found in food and is used by our body to do all these amazing things when it comes to reproduction and DNA development. And folic acid is a synthetic supplemental source of that natural folate. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people, so up to 50% of the population, that have difficulty metabolizing folate. So they have what's called the MTHFR gene, and there are 4 different variants of that gene, and that's very critical as to which one you have and what your metabolic pathways look like. So in the larger webinar, I will dig deeper into MTHFR and some nuances to look at in their bloods to make sure that they're optimizing folate levels. So unfortunately, this is one of the nutrients where a folate blood test is almost irrelevant, can be misleading. I always look at both folate and homocysteine, and if I have any concerns there, I will look at their MTHFR pathways to make sure they're metabolizing folate, because there are 3 different forms of folate that are available on the market. So we've got folic acid, calcium folate, and methylfolate, which is the most active form of folate. So when you're testing blood levels, you're testing whether there is folic acid floating around in the bloodstream or there is some sort of folate floating around in the bloodstream, not whether it's actually getting metabolized and utilized into our cells. So don't just rely on a folate blood test. In fact, if I see quite high levels, I want to make sure, okay, is it actually getting fed to where it needs to be? So I'll touch on the highlights today. So folic acid, calcium folate, and methylfolate. I always caution methylfolate. It is the most active, but it can be too stimulating for a lot of people unless you properly understand their MTHFR pathway. So what I recommend is a combination of folic acid and calcium folinate, or folinic acid. You can see it as it's one of the folates found in food. So a combination of those 2 when you're looking in a prenatal supplement. And of course, dietary sources, plenty of greens and all that sort of thing. So choline is another key nutrient that you may not have heard of, which I will touch on now because it plays such a critical role in that neural tube development alongside folate. It helps with that brain development, and a higher dietary intake of choline is associated with a reduction in the risk of having a child with neural tube defects. So we really want to get both choline and folate during those precious early stages. And choline status in the first half of pregnancy is associated with cognitive development in the infant, so that brain development. Again, however, there are deficiencies, and this is up to 90% of the population are not reaching adequate levels, and I'll go into the whys of that in the larger webinar. Still evolving studies on choline. So improvements in Down syndrome dysfunction, reduced risk of schizophrenia, reduced risk of Alzheimer's disease, and improved learning and memory. And we're still learning more about choline. And I love this quote that I think sums up where we are. It says, the importance of choline cannot be overstated as we continue to unravel the role it plays in human health and development. So the American Medical Association announced its recommendations to include choline in all prenatal vitamins. However, in Australia, which is where I am, it hasn't hit our shores. So be sure to look for a supplement which provides choline. Iodine is something that is in all prenatal vitamins, but should be looked for if you're not in Australia. Australian and New Zealand guidelines do recommend iodine supplementation in prenatal vitamins, and it is the most common cause of intellectual impairment worldwide is iodine deficiency. So in any TGA listed product in Australia, you will find the recommended intake of iron. And the World Health Organization, again, along with Australian and New Zealand guidelines, strongly supports that supplementation during pregnancy. So vitamin D, I think we all hear a lot about vitamin D, and for good reason. It's actually almost known as a pro-hormone. It works like a steroid hormone. It's involved in so many integral parts of reproduction and the regulation of over 2,000 genes, and linked to many health conditions, including infertility and pregnancy complications. So it's vital for that calcium transport, which is most known for, to transport calcium from the mother into the baby and also into the bones more specifically. And it is one of the few nutrients that you will pass on to your baby, which a lot of the other nutrients, you know, babies quite like a leech, they'll take everything they need from mum, leave her deplete, but they will get everything they need. And unfortunately, vitamin D can be passed on, a lot harder to treat in the infant. So I like to get mum's levels up, particularly in that second trimester when there's a lot of bone growth happening. I do monitor her vitamin D levels because I have seen them plummet in patients before. Unfortunately, it's increasingly common, found in 80% of pregnant mothers and their infants, even those already consuming prenatal vitamins. So again, I'm going to help you look at the blood levels and look at the dosing a bit more importantly in that larger webinar. So iron, I like to first put this up. Okay, can we please stop constipating our poor pregnant women with the wrong iron supplements? Iron should not cause constipation and gastric upset, or we're giving it in the wrong form or the wrong dose, or possibly both. So there's 3 common supplemental forms of iron that you can get. I do recommend an amino acid chelate, which is far better absorbed for the mother. And I'm going to talk more detail about dosing of that as well, because iron is a heavy metal and it's not easily excreted from the body. It is super important in pregnancy, which I'll go into. We want to see healthy levels, and I'll explain the blood levels that I like to see. But the upper safe limit is 45 milligrams, and doses shouldn't be consumed unless under the supervision of a healthcare professional. But there are a lot of supplements providing way above that are most likely to, unfortunately, constipate these women, turn their stool black, just not a great place. And if it's constipating you, it can't be in your bloodstream in your cells, because it wouldn't be still sitting there causing that constipation. So we want to get, again, that metabolism. It's not just about it being in the tablet. We want it being in the bloodstream where it's effective. The other one I'll touch on is vitamin B12. We'll dig into this a bit more, but it's required alongside folate and iron in that trifecta of DNA creation. Unfortunately, poor vitamin B12 in the infant is linked to poor growth and neural development. So we really want to get healthy B12 levels alongside folate and iron, which create that DNA during pregnancy. So I'm going to be digging deeper into all of these and giving you some more information around how to best help your patients. So just to quickly touch on how I can help your patients, I see patients all over the world via Zoom, and I help them, as I said, optimize their fertility well-being to create those healthy pregnancies and healthy babies. So all the way through from fertility and preconception, all the way through pregnancy, and helping them with birth prep. So my Fertility for You program is where I see them one-on-one weekly through that 90-day period to help them conceive. So people having fertility difficulties. My Your Fertile Pantry program is my group program. It's a 6-week fast-tracked online program where we meet weekly over Zoom, just like this, and I help support their fertility diet and key nutrients, just like we have, to create their healthy pregnancies. And Zycia Natal Nutrients is the prenatal supplement that I developed when I was struggling to conceive, and that's called Zacia and means life. So I also have the Conceive Baby podcast. This is one I did with Professor Marie Cordill. If you'd like to dig deeper into choline again, she's got fascinating research. She's from the Cornell University in New York, and you can Google Conceive Baby podcast or find my podcast at tashajennings.com.au under the podcast tab. The other thing I can do to help your patients is a free checklist to help them with dietary sources. There's some recipes in there, some simple swaps they can do in their diet to help create that fertile environment. So tashajennings.com.au/checklist. I hope you enjoyed this taster, and I look forward to digging deeper into these nutrients with you. Speak to you soon.